Today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the Tier 8 tech tree ships that I do think is worth buying and grinding, the Tier 8 IJN gunboat destroyer, Kitakaze. And this was my very first game in the Kitakaze. Actually, I haven't had much of a chance to play this ship extensively. I plan to do that tonight, actually, after work, so expect to see some more follow-up videos on this ship. But basically, this is an Akizuki. It's a successor to the Akizuki that is improved in almost every way, and I say almost with asterisks around it because there is something about the Kitakaze that is inferior to the Akizuki, something that I think is both baffling and potentially a deal breaker for those who might want to grind to this Tier 8 destroyer. But to start off with, the Kitakaze has 23,740 HP. That's only about 700 more than the Akizuki, so not much of a difference there. Likewise, the artillery is almost essentially the same. There are 8 100mm guns that have the improved IJN HE penetration, so they can at least pen same-tier destroyers, and they can pen the superstructures of battleships and cruisers, maybe even the hulls of some of the cruisers. But the difference between the Kitakaze's guns and the Akizuki's guns comes in the reload time. With the same build on both of the destroyers, the reload time I have for the Kitakaze guns is 2.6 seconds, and the reload time I have for the Akizuki guns is 2.4. So the Kitakaze has a 0.2 second slower reload than the Akizuki, which doesn't make a lot of sense considering it's a tier higher. And that is a reduction in DPM, albeit one that I don't think is super noticeable. And there are other aspects of this ship that I think sort of make up for it. So, slightly slower DPM, but same maximum HE and AP shell damage. Torpedoes, though, much improved over the Akizuki. The Kitakaze, with the reload booster, is capable of sending out 12 torpedoes, 6 from its, what would that even be? Sextuple launcher? I have no idea, but there are 6 torpedoes in one launcher, and the Akizuki comes with a reload boost. So 12 torpedoes. Or, I'm sorry, the Kitakaze. So 12 torpedoes in total, at least theoretically. The AA defense is rated at 67. Doesn't do a lot of average DPS with any of the AA, but I think it might be at least somewhat effective, more than your average destroyer. And as you can see, even though the DPM is less than the Akizuki's, the Kitakaze still has absolutely no problem melting destroyers that are pushing into it. The Lo Yang, I think he started this engagement at full health, and he's going to end it by going back to port. Note that we're switching to the AP. Because of the very small gun caliber at 100mm, if you shoot this AP at a broadside destroyer, you tend to get full penetrations, which does more damage than the AP. So I highly recommend shooting the AP in this and in the Akizuki whenever possible. At any broadside of any ship, cruiser, battleship, or destroyer, you'll do more damage than you would with the HE. The HE is just for penning angled destroyers that you can't penetrate with the AP, and it's also for lighting fires. It's got a fairly mediocre fire chance. It's got a really fast reload, but only a 5% fire chance. So I don't think it's the most efficient starter ever known to man. But the real improvement over the Akizuki comes in the maneuverability department. The Kitakaze is able to reach a maximum speed of 36 knots before the engine boost, whereas the Akizuki can only do 33. That difference of 3 knots might not sound like a lot on paper, but it is a world of difference when it comes to moving around the map and repositioning. Plus, you can stack the engine boost on top of that, and you can get this thing going closer to 40 or so knots, which is like normal destroyer speed, whereas the Akizuki is at best normal cruiser speed, which feels very slow for a destroyer. The concealment on these things is practically the same as well. I don't really have mine built for concealment. I've got it built for maximum gun power, using the mortar skill on the commander, so I have a 6-kilometer concealment, and that's the same thing that the Akizuki has with the same build. So this is a bit of an incremental improvement over the Akizuki. Yes, it has slightly worse DPM, but it's got better torpedoes and it's got far superior maneuverability. Both of these things, I think, go a long way, and I think make the grind and actually playing the ship worth it. It is a ship that excels at demolishing enemy destroyers. In fact, we're going to get the sinkings on all 3 of the enemy destroyers in this game as we're playing the epicenter here. We're not inside the center circle, in the middle ring instead, but it does look like we're going to secure the entirety of the epicenter ring. We launch torpedoes at a Georgia coming through. He immediately turns, so he's going to dodge them, but I do think we're about to have a torpedo reload booster online, so we may be able to correct our error in launching the torpedoes at our own teammate. Maybe launch him down this gap if Georgia looks like he's coming down, and it looks like he is committing to come down this gap, although these torpedoes might still not hit him anyway. If they do hit, they are proper IJN torpedoes. They've got a maximum damage of 23,767, which I think is the same thing as the Shima, so these are more or less Shima torpedoes as well. But of course, this is not about the torpedoes. It is very much about the guns. There goes the second destroyer of the game, and what do you know? Right on cue, the third destroyer, who has absolutely no HP, gets spotted pushing into the cap, and just like that, he's back to port. So this game is basically won. There's battleships on the outside, but me and my teammate here in the destroyer would really have to screw up in order to throw away this lead. We are going to have to run away from the Republique, though, because we are still spotted, and we need to go dark so he can't shoot us and demolish us. Plus, we've got the Georgia pushing in, and the Georgia has managed to take out the other friendly destroyer, so maybe this game isn't quite as wrapped up as I initially thought. We're going to have to retreat from this capture circle or this epicenter. We don't want to die in it, certainly. And once we retreat far enough, we may be able to open our guns on either the Georgia or Republique. Both of these ships are on very low health, and we should be able to melt them. The Kitakaze's DPM, even if it is slightly less than the Akizuki's, is pretty ferocious on paper. It can melt battleships, cruisers, destroyers. The ship is really all about the guns, but even though the maneuverability on the Kitakaze relative to the Akizuki is improved, this is still not the most maneuverable destroyer you've ever seen. It's got a 730-meter turning circle and a 5.1 second rudder shift, which isn't all that responsive or agile at all. So I find the best way to play this destroyer and the Kitakaze, and this is something that people probably should take note of, is that you need to utilize the range on the guns. Personally, I build for the range using Rumble as one of my inspirations and the range mod instead of the reload mod. You could, of course, go the other way, but the Kitakaze has very flat shell arcs for this kind of destroyer and this size of guns. These guns are pretty easy to aim at range. I think a little bit easier than things like the Fletcher or the Black. These are less floaty, so there's that. And even though the Kitakaze is normal destroyer speed, it doesn't turn very well, and it also just, if it's going to get into close range gunfight with something like an American destroyer, say a Sumner, a Gearing, a Fletcher, it's going to be at a disadvantage because those destroyers excel at close range knife fights. That's what they want to do. They want to get in as close as possible because they've got very little floaty shell arcs that are difficult to aim at range, especially against anything maneuvering. So they need to get up close and personal and knife fight, and that's what they're designed for. This thing is the opposite. It is absolutely not designed for knife fights, and if you take it into knife fights and play it like an American destroyer, you're probably not going to have much success in it because you don't have the same excellent maneuverability that the American destroyers have, and that is key in destroyer v destroyer trades at close range, because part of the way you avoid taking damage in a destroyer in close range knife fights is by messing with the throttle, going full throttle, full stop, full reverse, trying to juke as many shells as possible. You can do that in the Akizuki, but you definitely can't do it to the same degree as an American one or an American destroyer can at a close range. So you want to play this thing further back, and if you do, you'll absolutely melt everything with the guns, and you have the torpedoes if things start pushing into you or something, or, if you just want to launch torpedoes. One word of caution, though, with respect to the torpedoes. The base torpedoes the Kitakaze has are the ones I described, the ones with 23,767 damage. They also have 11 kilometers of range and a 67 knot speed. Perfectly respectable as far as IJN torpedoes go. And if you choose not the module, but the upgrade on the sort of tech line of the ship, you know how you get a new ship, you grind it across the line, and as the line fills up with XP, the upgrades become available, the hull, the guns, and the engines. Well, on the Kitakaze, there is a torpedo, quote-unquote, upgrade, which instead of upgrading the torpedoes, I think actually downgrades them. What it does is it reduces the torpedo range from 11 kilometers to 8 kilometers, increases the speed from 67 to 76 knots, decreases the maximum damage a little bit, and decreases the reload time. So they become, I guess, Udachi Screamer Torps with the quote-unquote upgrade module. That I don't think is useful for a destroyer like this because, again, it is not a knife fighter. It is like a mini cruiser that needs to play at slightly longer ranges. So I don't think you want to take the Screamer Torps on it. I think you want the base 11 km Torps. They are, in my opinion, superior. And that's kind of how I think the ship should be played. You can feel free to let me know if you disagree in the comments, but this game is basically wrapped up to an end here. We've more or less helped secure the win for our team by playing the epicenter earlier on and securing all 3 of the rings. The enemy has secured 1 of them, but we still have the majority, so we have the points lead. And now that this Iowa has taken damage from our CV, well, we can just finish him off with the AP. And you can see it only took 1 salvo for about 2,100 damage. The AP is pretty effective against broadsides. And that just leaves the enemy carrier left. So this game is a glorious victory. We've got 4 kills to our name, only 79,000 damage. Obviously, this ship is capable of a lot more. I just haven't really been able to get a game where I could farm a lot of damage off of a lot of battleships, because the games just keep ending too quickly these days. 6 ships are dead within the first 5 minutes of the match, and it's like, what are you going to do? Either they're on your team, so you're going to lose, or they're on the enemy team, so you're going to win really, really fast. There's not a lot of opportunity to farm damage with this lovely DPM from the Kitakaze. Nevertheless, I think it is a good destroyer. I'm glad that we have another in the Akizuki line because I much prefer this design for IJN Destroyer than I do the one-trick pony torpedo line, which really is only good for launching torpedoes, is poorly played, generally speaking, and doesn't have as much carry potential as this thing does, because this thing has guns. And more often than not, carrying a game in a destroyer means sinking the other destroyers. You're not really going to do that efficiently with your torpedoes. You're going to do it with your guns. So I much prefer better working guns on a destroyer than I do torpedoes for that very reason. And thus, I really enjoy the Akizuki, and I really enjoy the Kitakaze. I think it's worth grinding. I've heard some rumblings out there that people don't think it's worth grinding, and the thing they point to is the slower reload for the main battery guns on the Kitakaze versus the Akizuki. I understand that. I think it makes absolutely no sense that the Tier 7 should have slightly more DPM than the Tier 8, but hey, here we are. Maybe at some point in the future that will be changed, because I kind of think it should be. I think the Kitakaze should probably have superior DPM. But it does have better torpedoes, and it does have better maneuverability. I think those things go a long way into making this a ship I certainly wanted to pursue, and I would recommend it over some of the other Tier 8 tech trees. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.